The bread was burning, and Lydia Lancaster didn't care anymore because the children outside her window were crying from hunger, and she had already given away everything else she owned. It was September 1882 in Westcliff, Colorado, a mining town nestled in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where silver dreams brought desperate men and their even more desperate families. Lydia had arrived 3 months ago with her father, a preacher who believed God had called him to minister to the miners. 2 weeks after their arrival, a cave-in at the Bassick mine had taken him along with 17 other men, leaving Lydia alone at 22 years old with nothing but a small cabin, a cast-iron stove, and a fierce determination to continue her father's work in her own way. She pulled the slightly scorched loaves from the oven, wincing at the heat that penetrated her thin cotton towel. The smell of fresh bread filled the cramped space, mixing with the pine smoke from the stove and the crisp mountain air that snuck through the gaps in the log walls. Outside, she could hear the shuffling of feet, the quiet murmurs of families who had nothing left after the mine owners had cut wages again. Lydia opened her door to find them waiting as they did every Tuesday and Friday, a ragged line of women with hollow eyes and children with dirt-smudged faces. She smiled despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones, despite the fact that she had eaten nothing but broth and stale biscuits for the past week herself. "Come on then," she said, her voice carrying the warmth her body no longer felt. "There's enough for everyone." She wasn't sure if that was true, but she would make it true somehow. She always did. The first woman in line, Martha Holbrook, clutched a baby to her chest while 2 small boys hid in her skirts. "Bless you, Miss Lancaster. Bless you true." Lydia handed her 2 loaves, watching as tears tracked clean lines down Martha's dusty cheeks. One by one, the families came forward, and one by one, Lydia gave away the bread she had started baking at dawn, using the last of the flour she had purchased on credit from Henderson's general store. Mr. Henderson had told her yesterday that he couldn't extend her credit any further, not unless she had something to trade. She had nothing to trade but her father's Bible, and she would starve before she sold that. The line finally ended, and Lydia closed the door, leaning against it with her eyes shut. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and her hands trembled from exhaustion. The small bag of flour in her cupboard was empty, and she had no money for more. Tomorrow was Sunday, and she had promised to bring bread to the church service. She had promised, and she never broke her promises. "I'll figure something out," she whispered to the empty room. "I always do." But this time she wasn't sure that was true. The next morning, Lydia walked the 2 miles to Henderson's general store with her father's pocket watch, the only thing of value she had left. The September air was cold, and she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she passed the saloons and gambling halls that lined Main Street. Miners stumbled out of doorways, their eyes red from whiskey and lack of sleep, while women in bright dresses called out offers that made Lydia's cheeks burn. She kept her eyes down and her pace quick, knowing that a woman alone was always vulnerable, especially one without money or protection. Westcliff was a town built on desperation and greed, where fortunes changed as quickly as the mountain weather and violence was as common as dust. Henderson's general store sat at the corner of Main Street and Silver Avenue, a weathered building with a false front that made it look grander than it was. Lydia pushed open the door, hearing the bell jangle overhead, and found Mr. Henderson behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his bulbous nose as he tallied figures in a ledger. "Miss Lancaster," he said without looking up, "I told you I can't extend more credit." "I know, Mr. Henderson. I brought something to trade." She pulled the watch from her pocket, setting it gently on the counter. The gold case caught the morning light streaming through the window, and she felt her throat tighten. It had been her grandfather's watch, passed down to her father, and it was the last piece of family she had left. Henderson picked it up, turning it over in his thick fingers. He opened the case, examined the works, then closed it with a snap. "I'll give you enough flour for 2 weeks and a pound of salt." "That's not nearly worth the value of the watch," Lydia protested, though she knew it would do no good. "That's my offer. Take it or leave it." She wanted to leave it, wanted to snatch the watch back and storm out with her dignity intact. But dignity wouldn't feed hungry children, and pride wouldn't bake bread. "I'll take it." Henderson measured out the flour with agonizing slowness, then wrapped the salt in brown paper. Lydia gathered her purchases, holding back tears until she was outside and halfway down the street. Then she ducked into the narrow alley between the store and the livery stable, pressing her back against the rough wood siding as she let herself cry. "You all right, miss?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped her parcels. She spun around to find a man standing at the mouth of the alley, tall and lean in the way of men who spent their lives on horseback. He wore dusty trousers, scuffed boots, and a brown vest over a faded blue shirt. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see dark eyes watching her with what looked like genuine concern. "I'm fine," she said quickly, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "Just had dust in my eyes." He stepped closer and she got a better look at him. He was young, maybe 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled over his collar. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all sharp angles and strong bones with a mouth that looked like it smiled easily. But it wasn't smiling now. "That's a lot of dust," he said quietly. "Must have been a whole dust storm in your eyes." Despite everything, Lydia felt a small laugh escape. Something like that. "I'm Yates Lawson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Just rode into town this morning. Been working cattle drives down south, but I heard there was work up here in the mines." "There is," Lydia said, "but it doesn't pay much and it's dangerous. Most work worth doing is." He studied her for a moment and she felt herself growing uncomfortable under his gaze. "You live here in Westcliff?" "I do." She clutched her parcels tighter. "I should be going." "Wait." He reached into his pocket and Lydia tensed, suddenly aware of how alone they were in the alley, but he only pulled out a coin, holding it out to her. "You look like you could use this more than me." She stared at the silver dollar gleaming in his palm, feeling shame and gratitude war inside her chest. "I can't take your money. It's not charity if you don't think of it that way. Think of it as an investment in whatever you're doing that makes you cry in alleyways." His voice was gentle, without pity, and somehow that made it bearable. Lydia looked at the coin, then at his face, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart skip in an unfamiliar way. Kindness was rare in Westcliff, especially from strangers, and she found herself wanting to trust this man with the easy voice and careful hands. "I bake bread," she said suddenly. "For the hungry families, the miners' families. I use the flour to bake bread and I give it away because they have nothing and I can't just watch children starve." Yates was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's good work. Important work." He pressed the coin into her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Buy more flour. Bake more bread." "I don't even know you," she whispered. "Then maybe we should fix that." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more genuine than anyone she had met since coming to this hard-edged town. "I'm staying at the boarding house on 4th Street. Maybe I could stop by sometime, see this bread-baking operation of yours." Lydia knew she should say no. A proper woman didn't invite strange men to her home, especially not a woman living alone. But there was something about Yates Lawson that made her want to say yes, something that cut through her loneliness like sun through clouds. "I live in the cabin past the church," she heard herself say. "The one with the blue door. The one with the blue door," he repeated. "I'll remember that." He tipped his hat again and walked away, leaving Lydia standing in the alley with a silver dollar clutched in her palm, and a strange flutter in her chest that felt dangerously close to hope. That afternoon, Lydia mixed and kneaded dough until her arms ached, using the extra flour the silver dollar had bought. She shaped the loaves with practiced hands, thinking about Yates Lawson and the way he had looked at her, like she was something worth seeing. She wasn't beautiful, she knew that. Her face was too thin, her hands too rough, her hair a plain brown that never held a curl. But for a moment in that alley she had felt beautiful. The bread baked, filling her cabin with warmth and the yeasty smell of rising dough. She had just pulled the first batch from the oven when someone knocked on her door. Her heart jumped foolishly, but when she opened it, she found not Yates but Samuel Price, the foreman from the Bassick mine. Price was a heavy man with cold eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently fixed in a sneer. He removed his hat when he saw her but didn't bother with pleasantries. "Miss Lancaster, we need to talk about this bread situation." "What bread situation?" Lydia asked, keeping her hand on the door frame. "You've been giving food to the miners' families, creating unrealistic expectations. Making them think they don't need to work for what they get." Heat flared in Lydia's chest. "Those families are starving because you cut their wages. Again, business decisions aren't your concern. What is your concern is that you're causing problems. The men see their wives and children getting free handouts and they get ideas. They start thinking maybe they should ask for more, maybe they should organize, maybe they should make demands." He stepped closer, and Lydia caught the smell of tobacco and sweat. "I'm here to tell you to stop." "Or what?" The words came out braver than she felt. "Or things might get difficult for you. Accidents happen in mining towns, Miss Lancaster. Buildings catch fire. Women living alone find themselves in dangerous situations." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'd hate to see something bad happen to such a charitable young woman." Fear crawled up Lydia's spine, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Get off my property, Mr. Price. Think about what I said." He put his hat back on and walked away, his boots heavy on the packed earth. Lydia closed the door and leaned against it, her hands shaking. She had known her bread baking might cause trouble, but she hadn't expected direct threats. For a moment, she considered stopping, considered keeping her head down and staying safe. But then she thought about Martha Holbrook's baby, about the children with their hollow eyes, and she knew she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. The next morning was Sunday, and Lydia loaded her wagon with the bread she had baked the night before. The wagon was old and rickety, left behind by her father, pulled by an equally old mare named Patience. She drove slowly through the early morning streets toward the church, a simple white building with a crooked steeple at the edge of town. Reverend Thomas met her at the door, his kind face creased with concern. "Lydia, my dear, I heard Samuel Price paid you a visit. Word travels fast." She began unloading the bread and the Reverend helped her carry it inside. "Too fast in this town. Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, just threatened me. Nothing I can't handle." Reverend Thomas set down his armload of bread and turned to her. "Lydia, perhaps you should consider stopping for a while, just until things calm down. Price is a dangerous man and you have no one to protect you." "I don't need protection to do the right thing." Noble words, but they won't stop a bullet or a torch. He sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. "I'm not saying give up forever, just be careful, be smart." Before Lydia could respond, the church door opened and people began filing in for the service. She helped arrange the bread on a table near the back, then took her usual seat in the third pew. The church filled slowly, miners and their families settling onto the hard wooden benches with tired movements and wary eyes. The service was just beginning when the door opened one more time, and Yates Lawson walked in. He removed his hat, his eyes scanning the room until they found Lydia. Something in her chest twisted when he smiled at her, a small private smile that felt like a secret between them. He made his way to her pew and, without asking, sat down beside her. "Hope you don't mind company," he whispered. "Not at all," she whispered back, very aware of the warmth of him next to her, the way his shoulder almost touched hers. Reverend Thomas preached about caring for the least among them, about being the hands and feet of faith in a harsh world. Lydia had heard similar sermons before, but today the words seemed to carry extra weight, settling into her bones like a promise she had already made to herself. After the service, people gathered around the bread table, and Lydia distributed the loaves as she always did, making sure everyone got their share. She was handing a loaf to an elderly woman when she noticed Yates standing off to the side, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When the last loaf was given away, he approached. "You weren't exaggerating about the bread baking." "I never exaggerate about important things." She brushed flour dust from her dress, suddenly self-conscious. "Did you find work at the mine? Start tomorrow?" "Though I'm starting to wonder if that was a good decision." He glanced around at the families leaving the church, at the thin faces and worn clothes. "This town seems like it's built on broken backs. Most mining towns are." Lydia picked up the empty basket. "But the people here are good people. They deserve better than what they're getting. And you've decided to give them better, one loaf of bread at a time. It's not much, but it's what I can do." Yates took the basket from her hands. "Let me walk you home." They walked together through the quiet Sunday streets, Patience plodding along behind them pulling the empty wagon. Yates asked her about her father, about how she had learned to bake, about her life before Westcliff. She found herself talking more than she had in months, the words spilling out like water from a cracked dam. "My father was a good man," she said as they turned onto the narrow road that led to her cabin. "He believed people were fundamentally decent, that they just needed guidance and support. I thought he was naive when we first came here, but after he died, I realized he wasn't naive. He just had faith in something bigger than the circumstances." "You're carrying on his work," Yates observed, "in your own way." "I'm trying." She stopped at her door, taking the basket from him. "Thank you for walking me home." "It was my pleasure, Miss Lancaster." He hesitated, and she saw something uncertain flicker across his face. "Would it be too forward if I asked to see you again? Properly, I mean, not just at church." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had never been courted before, had never had a young man look at her the way Yates was looking at her now, like she was something precious and worth pursuing. That wouldn't be too forward at all. His smile was like sunrise. "Then maybe I could come by Tuesday evening. After my shift at the mine. I'll be baking bread, but you're welcome to keep me company. Can't think of anything I'd rather do." He tipped his hat and walked away, and Lydia stood at her door watching him go, feeling something warm and bright blooming in her chest. Tuesday came slowly. Lydia went through her routines in a daze, measuring flour and mixing dough while her mind wandered to dark eyes and a gentle voice. She told herself not to get her hopes up, that Yates was just being kind, that he would probably realize she wasn't worth his time and stop coming around. But despite her best efforts, hope kept bubbling up inside her like bread dough rising in the warmth. She had just put the first batch in the oven when Yates knocked on her door. He looked tired, his face smudged with coal dust and his clothes dirty from the mine, but his smile was as warm as ever. "I should have cleaned up first," he said apologetically, but I wanted to make sure I got here before you were done baking." "Come in," Lydia said, stepping aside. "You can wash up at the basin if you like." He washed his face and hands while she checked on the bread, and when he turned back to her, she saw a dark bruise blooming along his jaw. "What happened?" she asked, crossing to him without thinking, her fingers hovering near the injury. "Nothing serious. Just a disagreement with one of the other miners." "About what?" Yates was quiet for a moment, drying his hands on the towel she offered. "About you, actually. Some of the men were talking, saying things they shouldn't about a woman who gives away bread. I suggested they keep their thoughts to themselves." Warmth flooded through Lydia, but it was tinged with guilt. "You shouldn't have done that. You just started working there. You need that job. Some things are more important than jobs." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her breath catch. Like defending a woman's honor when ignorant men try to question it. No one had ever defended her before. Her father had loved her, but he had been too caught up in his mission to notice when people whispered about her, when they called her strange for choosing bread baking over finding a husband. Having Yates stand up for her, having him get hurt for her, made something shift inside her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for." His hand lingered near her face, and she found herself leaning into the almost touch, wanting more contact but not knowing how to ask for it. The moment broke when the oven timer rang. Lydia pulled away, flustered, and busied herself with removing the bread. Yates watched her work, asking questions about the process, about where she learned to bake, about how much flour she went through in a week. His interest seemed genuine, and she found herself relaxing, falling into an easy conversation that felt as natural as breathing. "I use about 50 pounds of flour a week," she explained, shaping another loaf with practiced efficiency. "Sometimes more if there's extra need. I buy it on credit when I can, trade what I have when I can't." "What did you trade for this batch?" Yates asked. Lydia hesitated, then decided honesty was better than evasion. "My father's pocket watch. It was the last valuable thing I had." Yates was quiet, and when she glanced at him, she saw something fierce in his expression. "You gave up your last valuable possession to feed other people. It's just a watch. It doesn't feed hungry children. It was also your father's. It had sentimental value. Sentiment doesn't fill empty stomachs." She placed the shaped loaf in the pan, her movements perhaps a bit more forceful than necessary. "I made my choice. I'm at peace with it. You're a remarkable woman, Lydia Lancaster." The way he said her name, soft and reverent, made her pulse quicken. She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her forget about bread and flour and everything else. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them in the warm, yeast-scented space of her small cabin. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," she said, but her voice came out breathless. "That's what makes you remarkable." He stood, crossing to where she worked at the table. "Most people see what needs to be done and look away. You look straight at it and get to work." He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the soap he had used to wash away the mine dust. Her hands stilled in the dough, and she felt frozen, caught between fear and wanting. "Yates," she started, not sure what she was going to say. He lifted his hand, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "I know we just met. I know this is fast. But I need you to know that I see you, Lydia. Not just the bread baking or the charity work. I see you and I think you're extraordinary." A tear slipped free and he wiped it away with his thumb. "No one's ever seen me before," she whispered. "Not really. Then everyone else has been blind." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the warmth and connection she had been denying herself since her father died. His lips touched her softly, a question rather than a demand, and she answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back. It was her first kiss, unpracticed and uncertain, but it felt right in a way that made her whole body come alive. His arms came around her, careful and strong, and she leaned into him, into this moment of sweetness in her hard Scrabble life. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I should apologize for that, but I can't bring myself to lie." "Don't apologize," Lydia said. "Don't you dare apologize." He laughed, the sound warm and rich, and kissed her forehead before stepping back. "I should let you finish your work, but can I come back, tomorrow? Every day if you'll let me." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." He left with a promise to return, and Lydia finished her baking in a daze, her lips still tingling from that one perfect kiss. She had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought it was something from storybooks and songs. But this feeling inside her, this certainty that Yates Lawson was someone who could change her life, felt too real to be anything but truth. The next weeks passed in a blur of bread and stolen moments. Yates came by every evening after his shift at the mine, helping her measure flour and knead dough while they talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to fever and being raised by his uncle, about years spent trailing cattle and looking for a place to belong. She told him about her mother's death when she was young, about following her preacher father from town to town, about the loneliness of always being the outsider. "I feel less alone when I'm with you," she admitted one evening as they sat on her front step, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Good," he said, taking her hand and threading his fingers through hers, "because I plan on making sure you're never alone again." The words should have frightened her, should have seemed too much too soon. But instead they felt like a promise she wanted him to keep. On Friday of the third week since Yates had arrived in Westcliff, Lydia was loading bread into her wagon for the usual distribution when Samuel Price appeared at the end of her path. He wasn't alone this time. 3 other men stood behind him, all large and mean-looking, the kind of men who did the mine owner's dirty work. "Miss Lancaster," Price said, his voice oily with false politeness. "I thought we had an understanding." "We don't have anything," Lydia replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Now please leave my property." "See, that's the problem. You didn't listen to my friendly advice, and now things have to get unfriendly." He nodded to the men behind him, and they started forward. Lydia grabbed a rolling pin from her wagon, holding it like a weapon. "Don't come any closer." They laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. "What are you going to do with that, sweetheart? Bake us to death?" "She's not going to do anything." "But I might have some ideas." Everyone turned to see Yates striding up the path, and the relief that flooded through Lydia was so intense it made her knees weak. He looked dangerous in a way she had never seen before, his easy warmth replaced by something harder and more threatening. "Lawson," Price said, "this doesn't concern you. Anything involving Miss Lancaster concerns me." Yates positioned himself between Lydia and the men, his hand resting casually on the gun belt Lydia hadn't known he carried. "I suggest you all turn around and head back to wherever you came from. You're 1 man against 4. Those aren't good odds. They're good enough." Yates' voice was flat and cold. "But if you need more incentive to leave, you should know that Reverend Thomas and about 15 miners are heading this way right now. Seems word got around about your plans for this afternoon." Price's face darkened, and Lydia saw him calculating, trying to decide if Yates was bluffing. Then voices rose from down the road, and a group of men came into view, led by Reverend Thomas, and carrying tools that could serve as weapons if needed. "This isn't over," Price snarled at Lydia. "You're causing trouble that's going to come back on you." "The only one causing trouble here is you," Yates said. "Now get gone before I decide to make this more interesting." Price and his men backed away, shooting threatening looks but clearly unwilling to face down a growing crowd. Once they were out of sight, Lydia's knees finally gave out and she sat down hard on the step of her wagon. Yates was beside her immediately, his arms around her, his voice soft in her ear. "You're all right. I've got you. You're all right." "How did you know?" she asked through trembling lips. "One of the miners overheard Price talking. He came and found me at the mine." Yates pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks. "Lydia, this is getting too dangerous. Price isn't going to stop, and next time I might not get here in time. I can't stop baking bread. Those families need it. I know. I'm not asking you to stop, I'm asking you to let me help protect you." Reverend Thomas approached, his kind face creased with worry. "Lydia, Yates is right. This has gone beyond simple intimidation. We need to find a solution." "What kind of solution?" Lydia asked. The Reverend and Yates exchanged a look, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Yates took a deep breath and turned back to Lydia. "Marry me," he said. Lydia's heart stopped. "What? Marry me? Today, tomorrow, as soon as possible. If you're my wife, you'll have my name and my protection. Price will think twice about threatening you if he knows he'll have to answer to me." "That's a terrible reason to get married," Lydia said, even as her heart was racing with something that felt dangerously like hope. "You're right. So how about this reason instead?" He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Lydia Lancaster. I've loved you since that day in the alley when you told me about baking bread for hungry children with tears on your face and steel in your spine. I love your fierce heart and your stubborn kindness and the way you make the world better just by being in it. I want to marry you because I can't imagine my life without you in it. The protection is just a bonus." Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, but they were good tears this time, happy tears that tasted like joy instead of sorrow. "I love you too. I think I loved you from that first moment, even though it seemed impossible. Nothing's impossible when it's right." He smiled, that wonderful warm smile that made her feel like the sun was shining just for her. "So is that a yes?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her there in front of Reverend Thomas and the assembled miners, a kiss that was promise and passion and the beginning of everything good. When they finally pulled apart, the men were cheering, and Lydia felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died: hope for the future. They were married 2 days later in the same white church where they had first sat together during the sermon. Lydia wore a simple blue dress that had been her mother's, and Yates wore his Sunday best, his dark hair neatly combed and his face shining with happiness. The church was packed with miners and their families, people who had come to see the breadwoman marry the cowboy who had defended her honor. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with tears in his eyes, speaking about love and commitment and building a life together in difficult times. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Lydia like she was the most precious thing in the world, and she kissed him back like he was her every answered prayer. The congregation threw rice as they walked out into the bright October afternoon, and Martha Holbrook pressed a small cake into Lydia's hands, made with precious sugar and eggs she could barely afford. "You gave us bread when we were hungry," Martha said. "It's only right we give you cake when you're happy." The celebration was simple but joyful, held in the church hall with music from a fiddle and dancing on the worn wooden floors. Yates danced with Lydia, holding her close and whispering things in her ear that made her blush and laugh. For one afternoon, the harshness of Westcliff faded away, replaced by community and celebration. As the sun set, Yates and Lydia walked back to what was now their cabin, hand in hand, husband and wife. Yates had spent the past 2 days moving his few possessions in and making small repairs, fixing the gaps in the walls and reinforcing the door. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Inside, he lit the lamps while Lydia stood nervously by the table, suddenly uncertain. She was a married woman now, with all that entailed, and she had no idea what to expect from the wedding night. Her father had never talked about such things, and she had no mother or sisters to advise her. Yates seemed to sense her nervousness. He crossed to her slowly, taking her hands. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We have the rest of our lives, Lydia. There's no rush." "I want to," she said quickly. "I'm just nervous. I don't know what to do." "Neither do I, if I'm being honest, but we'll figure it out together." He kissed her softly. "That's what marriage is, right? Figuring things out together." He was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was awkward and tender and absolutely perfect. Afterward, they lay tangled in the quilts on her bed, their bed now, and Lydia felt complete in a way she never had before. "I can't believe you're really mine," Yates whispered, running his fingers through her unbound hair. "I can't believe you're really mine," she echoed. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all be a dream." "Not a dream. A promise." He kissed her forehead. "I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to support your bread baking and protect you from anyone who tries to stop you. I promise to be the husband you deserve." "I promise to love you back just as fiercely," Lydia said. "I promise to make a home with you and build a life with you. I promise to be your partner in everything." They sealed their promises with kisses and fell asleep wrapped around each other, two lonely souls who had found their way home. The next morning, Lydia woke to find Yates already up and dressed, building up the fire in the stove. She watched him from the bed, this man who was now her husband, and felt gratitude surge through her so strongly it hurt. "Good morning, wife," he said when he noticed she was awake. "Good morning, husband." She liked the sound of that word, the weight and permanence of it. They had breakfast together. Then Yates left for his shift at the mine while Lydia began the familiar work of measuring flour and mixing dough. But everything felt different now, brighter and more hopeful. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a partner, someone who believed in her work and wanted to help her continue it. She was shaping loaves when someone knocked on the door. Thinking it might be one of the families coming early, she opened it without checking, then froze. Samuel Price stood on her doorstep, alone this time, his hat in his hands. He looked different somehow, smaller and older, the aggression gone from his face. "Miss Lancaster, I mean Mrs. Lawson, can I have a moment of your time?" Every instinct told Lydia to slam the door in his face, but something in his expression made her hesitate. "What do you want?" "To apologize." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "And to explain, if you'll let me." Against her better judgment, Lydia stepped outside, leaving the door open behind her. "Talk. The mine owners have been pushing me hard to increase productivity. They don't care about the workers, just the profit. When your bread baking started, the men started getting ideas about being treated better, about organizing. The owners blamed me, said I was losing control. I thought if I could stop you, I could get them off my back. So you threatened me, tried to intimidate me into stopping." "Yes. And I'm ashamed of it." He met her eyes and she saw genuine remorse there. "I was wrong. What you're doing, feeding those families, it's good work. Important work. I let pressure and fear turn me into someone I don't want to be." Lydia studied him, trying to determine if he was sincere or if this was some new manipulation. "Why are you telling me this now?" because last night my daughter got sick, real sick. And Martha Holbrook brought soup to my house, said it was the least she could do after all the bread you'd given her family." His voice cracked. "My daughter is better this morning because a woman I didn't give a damn about showed more kindness to strangers than I showed to my own workers. It made me take a hard look at the man I've become. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry and I won't bother you anymore. In fact, I'm going to do what I can to protect you if the owners try to cause trouble." He put his hat back on. "Your husband is right to be proud of you, Mrs. Lawson. You're making a real difference in this town." He walked away before Lydia could respond, leaving her standing on her doorstep trying to process what had just happened. She had expected many things from Samuel Price, but a genuine apology wasn't one of them. It reminded her of something her father used to say: "People can surprise you if you give them the chance." That evening, when Yates came home from the mine, she told him about Price's visit. He listened carefully, his face thoughtful. "You believe him?" he asked. "I think I do. He seemed genuinely sorry. Then we'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but I'll still keep a close eye on things." He pulled her into his arms. "I'm not taking any chances with your safety." "Our safety now," Lydia corrected. "We're a team. We are." He kissed her long and sweet. "The best team there is." Over the following months, their life settled into a rhythm. Yates worked at the mine while Lydia baked bread, and in the evenings they worked together, kneading dough and shaping loaves while they talked about their days. The bread distribution continued, and true to his word, Samuel Price not only left them alone but actively helped, using his position to pressure the mine owners into slightly better wages for the workers. Winter came hard to Westcliff that year, with snow piling high against the cabin walls and temperatures dropping so low that water froze in buckets overnight. The need for bread grew as families struggled to heat their homes and feed their children. Lydia baked more than ever, using every bit of flour they could afford and some they couldn't. "We're going through our savings too fast," Yates said one December evening, looking at their dwindling supply of money. "If we keep this up, we won't have enough to make it through winter ourselves." "We'll find a way," Lydia said, though privately she was worried too. The cost of flour had gone up as supply routes became difficult, and more families were depending on her bread than ever before. The next Sunday, Reverend Thomas made an announcement after the service. "As many of you know, Lydia and Yates Lawson have been providing bread to those in need, often at great personal cost. I propose we as a congregation take up a collection to help fund this ministry. Whatever you can spare, please give, so that the Lawsons can continue their good work without going hungry themselves." Lydia watched in amazement as people came forward, pressing coins and bills into the Reverend's hands. Even the poorest families gave something, pennies that represented real sacrifice. By the end, there was enough money to buy flour for 2 months. Martha Holbrook approached with tears in her eyes, pressing a worn dollar bill into Lydia's hand. "When my babies were crying from hunger, you fed them. Let us feed you back." Lydia couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She had started baking bread out of a sense of duty, a need to continue her father's work of helping others. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than that. It had become community, a web of kindness connecting all of them in their struggle to survive the harsh Colorado winter. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Thank you all so much." That night, lying in bed with Yates, she talked about what had happened. "I never expected people to help us. I thought we were doing this alone." "We're never alone when we're part of something bigger than ourselves," Yates said. "That's what community means. We help each other. We lift each other up." My father would have loved this. He always believed in the power of people coming together. He'd be proud of you, just like I'm proud of you." Yates pulled her closer, his hand resting on her stomach. "Speaking of proud, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." "What is it?" "I've been thinking about leaving the mine, maybe starting our own business. Something that would let me be around more, help you with the bread baking." Lydia propped herself up on her elbow, looking at him in the dim lamplight. "What kind of business?" "A bakery. A real one with a storefront and ovens big enough to bake for the whole town. We could sell bread to those who can afford it and still give it away to those who can't. It could work, Lydia. I know it could." The idea sparked something in her chest, a vision of possibility. "That would take a lot of money to start, more than we have." "I know. But we could save up, take our time, do it right." "What do you think?" Lydia thought about spending every day baking alongside her husband, about having a real bakery where the whole town could come, about expanding their ability to help people while also building something that would last. "I think it's a beautiful dream." "Then let's make it a reality." He kissed her, and she kissed him back, tasting the future on his lips. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. The bakery remained a dream, but it was a dream they worked toward together, setting aside what money they could while continuing to bake bread for those in need. Yates took on extra work when he could find it, and Lydia began selling some of her bread to the more prosperous families in town, using the profit to buy more flour for the free loaves. In July, Lydia realized she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when another month passed and she began feeling sick in the mornings, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She told Yates one evening as they worked together in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she shaped a loaf. "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the dough he was kneading, concern crossing his face. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" "Not sick, just pregnant." For a moment he just stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and bright it was like watching the sun come up. He dropped the dough, not caring about the mess, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small kitchen. "We're going to have a baby," he said, laughing. "Lydia, we're going to have a baby. We are." She was laughing too and crying, overwhelmed by joy and fear and anticipation all mixed together. He set her down carefully, his hands moving to her still flat stomach. "When? How long?" "I think about 2 months. The baby should come in February." "February, a winter baby." He kissed her, tender and reverent. "You're going to be a mother. You're going to be a father." They held each other in the flour-dusted kitchen, two people who had found each other against all odds and were now creating new life together. It felt like a miracle, like grace made manifest in their small cabin on the edge of Westcliff. The pregnancy changed things. Yates became even more protective, insisting Lydia rest more and let him do the heavy lifting. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated like an invalid, but as her belly grew and the work became more tiring, she learned to accept his help. The town rallied around them again. Martha Holbrook and the other women brought baby clothes and blankets, most of them worn and patched but clean and made with love. Samuel Price, true to his apparent reformation, arranged for Yates to move to a less dangerous position in the mine with the same pay. Reverend Thomas held a special blessing for the coming child, praying for safe delivery and a healthy baby. "This town has become our family," Lydia said to Yates one evening as they sorted through the pile of baby gifts. "It has. Funny how life works. We came here as strangers, and now we're woven into the fabric of this place. Do you ever regret it? Coming to Westcliff, you could have kept drifting, found somewhere easier to live." "Never." He pulled her into his lap, careful of her growing belly. "Because if I hadn't come here, I wouldn't have found you, and you're the best thing that ever happened to me." She kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. You're the best thing that happened to me, too. You and this baby and this life we're building." The leaves turned gold and red, and Lydia's belly continued to grow. She had to adjust her dresses, letting out seams and adding fabric panels. The bread baking continued, though Yates took over more of the heavy work. They had saved almost enough money for the bakery, and they spent their evenings planning, sketching out designs and making lists of what they would need. In November, Yates came home early from the mine with news. The old Henderson General Store is for sale. Henderson is retiring, moving back east to live with his daughter. The general store, Lydia's mind raced. That's a perfect location, right on Main Street where everyone passes by. I know, and the price is reasonable, at least by Westcliff standards. We don't quite have enough saved, but if we could get a loan from the bank, we might be able to swing it. They went to the bank the next day, Lydia walking slowly because her belly was large now and the baby was active, pressing on all her internal organs in uncomfortable ways. The bank manager, a thin man named Walter Simmons, listened to their proposal with a skeptical expression. "A bakery," he said flatly, "in a mining town, where most people can barely afford to feed themselves." "That's exactly why we need it," Lydia argued. "People need good bread, and we're the only ones providing it. We already have customers. We're just looking to expand. And you plan to continue giving bread away for free? To those who need it, yes, but we'll also sell to those who can pay. There are enough people in Westcliff with money to support the business side while we continue the charity work." Simmons drummed his fingers on his desk, clearly unconvinced. "What collateral do you have?" "Our cabin and our good reputation," Yates said. "Plus the savings we've already accumulated. We're not asking you to take all the risk, Mr. Simmons. We're asking you to invest in something that will benefit the whole community." After what felt like hours of negotiation and discussion, Simmons finally agreed to a loan with strict terms and a high interest rate. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough. They left the bank with a handshake agreement to finalize the papers the following week. "We're really doing this," Lydia said as they walked slowly back toward their cabin. "We're opening a bakery. We are. Our baby is going to grow up in a bakery, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the sound of customers chatting." Yates stopped walking, turning to face her. "I love you so much, Lydia. Thank you for dreaming this dream with me. Thank you for making me believe dreams can come true." They closed on the building in December, taking possession of the old general store with its wide windows and sturdy shelves. The next weeks were a blur of activity as they cleaned and renovated, tearing out old fixtures and installing ovens. The whole community helped, miners and their wives showing up to paint walls and build counters. Even Samuel Price came by, donating lumber and helping construct the large brick oven that would be the heart of the bakery. Lydia watched it all come together, one hand resting on her belly as the baby kicked and rolled inside her. She was 7 months pregnant now, large and ungainly, but she refused to rest while there was work to be done. She directed the renovations, planned the layout, designed the sign that would hang above the door, Lawson's Bakery EST. 1883. On Christmas Eve, they held a soft opening, inviting friends and neighbors to tour the new space and sample the first loaves baked in the new ovens. The turnout was bigger than they expected, people crowding into the warm bakery to admire the gleaming counters and breathe in the smell of fresh bread. Martha Holbrook stood in the center of the space with tears streaming down her face. "You did it. You really did it." "We all did it," Lydia corrected. "This bakery exists because this community supported us. It belongs to all of us." Reverend Thomas raised his cup of cider. "To Lydia and Yates Lawson and to Lawson's Bakery, May it nourish our bodies and our spirits for many years to come." Everyone cheered and drank, and Lydia felt a wave of emotion so strong she had to lean against Yates to stay upright. He wrapped his arm around her, supporting her weight, and whispered in her ear, "You all right? Better than all right. I'm perfect." They officially opened for business on January 2, 1883. The first customers came early, miners stopping by before their shifts to buy bread for their families. Word spread quickly, and soon there was a steady stream of people throughout the day. They sold loaves to those who could pay, and at the end of each day they gave away what remained to families in need. The bakery was everything they had hoped for and more. It provided income to support them and allowed them to continue their charity work on a larger scale. More than that, it became a gathering place, somewhere people could come not just for bread but for community and conversation. Lydia worked alongside Yates, though she moved more slowly now, her belly so large she could barely reach the work table. She was 8 months pregnant, and the baby seemed determined to arrive early, pressing down low and making her waddle when she walked. "You should rest more," Yates said for the 100th time as she insisted on helping knead a batch of dough. "I'm fine. Women have been working while pregnant since the beginning of time. Other women aren't carrying my child." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and placing his hands over hers on the dough. "Let me help. That's what I'm here for." She leaned back against him, accepting his support and his help. They kneaded the dough together, moving in synchronized rhythm, and Lydia thought about how far they had come from that first meeting in an alley when she was crying over a traded watch. "You remember the first time we met?" she asked. "Every detail. You had flour on your cheek and tears in your eyes, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." "I thought you were going to rob me," he laughed. "And instead I gave you money, best investment I ever made." "What do you mean?" "That dollar led to this. To you and me, to the bakery, to the life we're building. If I hadn't stopped in that alley, if I hadn't offered you that coin, none of this would exist." Lydia turned in his arms, awkward with her large belly between them. "I think we would have found each other anyway. Some things are meant to be." "You really believe that?" "I do. I believe you were meant to walk into my life exactly when you did. I believe we were meant to build this together." She took his hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was kicking up a storm. "I believe this child was meant to be ours." Yates bent down, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I believe it too. All of it." 3 weeks later, on a cold February night with snow falling thick outside the windows, Lydia's water broke. She was in the bakery, cleaning up after closing, when she felt the warm gush and the first tightening pain in her belly. "Yates," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. "It's time." He went pale. "Time, the baby, now. Now." Another contraction hit, stronger than the first, and she gripped the counter. "You need to get Martha and the midwife." Yates ran. Lydia had never seen him move so fast. Within 20 minutes, their small apartment above the bakery was full of women, Martha and the midwife, Mrs. Chen, taking charge while Yates paced in the hallway outside like a caged animal. Labor was long and painful, lasting through the night and into the next day. Lydia had never experienced anything like it. Waves of pain that made her want to scream interspersed with moments of calm where she could breathe and gather her strength for the next contraction. Martha held her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead and offering encouragement. "You're doing wonderfully, dear. Just keep breathing." "I can't do this," Lydia gasped between contractions. "It's too much." "You can and you will. You're the strongest woman I know. If you can feed a whole town on determination and flour, you can birth this baby." The words gave her strength. She thought about all she had overcome, all she had built with her own hands and stubborn will. She could do this. She would do this. As the sun set on the second day, Mrs. Chen finally said the words Lydia had been desperate to hear. "It's time to push." She pushed with everything she had, gripping Martha's hand so hard she was sure she was breaking bones. The pain was incredible, all-consuming, but underneath it was determination and joy and the knowledge that she was about to meet her child. "One more push," Mrs. Chen encouraged. "I can see the head. One more big push." Lydia pushed, screaming with the effort, and then suddenly there was release and relief and the sound of a baby crying. Mrs. Chen lifted a tiny, squalling infant, and Lydia saw through her tears that it was a boy, perfect and red and absolutely beautiful. "A son," Mrs. Chen announced. "You have a son." "A son," Lydia repeated, reaching for him with trembling hands. The midwife placed the baby on her chest, and Lydia felt a rush of love so intense it took her breath away. "Hello, sweetheart. Hello, my beautiful boy." The door burst open, and Yates rushed in, his face wild with worry. "Lydia, are you all right? Is the baby all right? We're perfect. Come meet your son." Yates approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the tiny infant on Lydia's chest. His face transformed, cycling through wonder and joy and love so pure it brought fresh tears to Lydia's eyes. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son. We do. Would you like to hold him?" Mrs. Chen showed him how to support the baby's head, and Yates took his son with shaking hands. He stared at the infant like he was seeing a miracle, and maybe he was. Lydia watched them together, her husband and her child, and thought her heart might burst from happiness. "What should we name him?" Yates asked softly. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at her son's tiny face, Lydia knew exactly what his name should be. "Thomas," she said, "after my father, Thomas Reverend Lawson." Yates smiled. "Thomas, that's perfect. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, little man." Baby Thomas yawned, his tiny mouth opening wide, and Lydia laughed with pure delight. Her son, her husband, her family. Everything she had ever wanted, everything she hadn't even known she needed, all wrapped up in this moment of perfect joy. The next months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and alert, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. The bakery continued to thrive, and the community embraced their newest member with enthusiasm, bringing gifts and offering help whenever it was needed. Lydia learned to bake with Thomas strapped to her chest in a sling Martha had made, his small body warm against her while she kneaded dough and shaped loaves. Yates learned to work the ovens while holding Thomas in one arm, developing skills he never knew he possessed. They were tired all the time, constantly covered in flour and baby spit up, but they were happy in a way that felt unshakable. In May, Samuel Price stopped by the bakery with news. The mine owners are implementing new safety measures and raising wages. Not as much as the workers deserve, but it's a start. They've finally realized that dead miners don't produce silver, and underpaid miners don't work as hard. "That's wonderful news," Lydia said, bouncing Thomas gently in her arms. "What changed their minds? A lot of things. But mostly the fact that this community started standing together, started demanding better. You started that, Lydia, with your bread and your refusal to look away from suffering. I just baked bread for hungry people. You did a lot more than that. You reminded us what community means. What caring for each other looks like." Price smiled at Thomas. "That boy is going to grow up in a better town because of what his mother started." After he left, Yates pulled Lydia close, careful not to squish Thomas between them. "He's right, you know. You changed this town. We changed it. Together." "Together," he agreed, kissing her forehead. "Everything we do together." Thomas grew quickly, hitting milestones that made Lydia simultaneously proud and sad. Her baby was growing up, becoming his own person, and she wanted to hold on to every moment even as time kept moving forward. By his first birthday in February of 1884, he was walking and babbling in a language only he understood, his personality emerging as curious and adventurous. They held a party in the bakery, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. The space was packed with people, miners and their families, Reverend Thomas and Samuel Price, Martha Holbrook and her children. They sang Happy Birthday while Thomas demolished a small cake Lydia had made specially for him, getting frosting everywhere and laughing with pure delight. "Hard to believe it's only been 2 years since I rode into town," Yates said, watching their son play with the other children. "So much has changed," Lydia agreed. "Sometimes I look at our life and can't believe it's real. It's real. We built it together, one loaf of bread at a time." She turned to face him, this man who had changed her life in every possible way. "I love you, Yates Lawson. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for believing in my dreams and making them yours too. I love you too, Lydia, more than words can say." He kissed her, long and sweet, while their son laughed and their friends celebrated around them. As spring turned to summer, Lydia realized she was pregnant again. The news came as less of a shock this time, though no less joyful. They told Thomas he was going to be a big brother, though at 18 months old he had no idea what that meant. He just smiled and said, "baby," which was one of his handful of clear words. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, maybe because Lydia knew what to expect, or maybe because she had helped this time. Yates took over more of the bakery work, and Martha came by regularly to watch Thomas so Lydia could rest. The community that had supported her through so much continued to be there, offering assistance and encouragement. In January of 1885, Lydia gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter this time, only 12 hours instead of 2 days, and when Mrs. Chen placed the baby girl in her arms, Lydia wept with joy. She was perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that were already trying to focus on her mother's face. "A daughter," Lydia whispered. "We have a daughter." Yates sat on the bed beside her, Thomas on his lap staring at his new sister with wide eyes. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." "What should we name her?" Lydia asked. "I was thinking maybe Martha, after Mrs. Holbrook. She's been such a good friend to us." Lydia smiled. "Martha Holbrook is going to cry when we tell her, probably. But happy tears." They named their daughter Martha Grace Lawson, and when they told Mrs. Holbrook, she did indeed cry, sobbing into her apron and declaring it the greatest honor of her life. Little Martha was a calm baby, easier than Thomas had been, content to watch the world with solemn eyes and sleep for longer stretches. The bakery continued to flourish. They paid off their loan to the bank ahead of schedule and began making enough profit to expand their charity work even further. They started offering cooking classes on Sunday afternoons, teaching families how to make their own bread with affordable ingredients. Yates taught mining safety courses in the evenings, using knowledge he had gained from his work to help keep other men safer. "We're not just running a bakery anymore," Lydia said one evening as they closed up shop. "We're building something bigger." "A legacy," Yates agreed. "Something that will outlast us, something our children can be proud of." Years passed in a blur of bread baking and child rearing. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping in the bakery, his small hands learning to shape dough under his mother's patient guidance. Martha grew into a thoughtful, observant child who seemed to understand emotions beyond her years, often comforting customers who came into the bakery with troubles weighing on their hearts. In 1887, Lydia found herself pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to another son, whom they named James after Yates' uncle who had raised him. James was a loud, demanding baby who kept them all on their toes, but his sunny disposition made up for the sleepless nights. The bakery became a Westcliff institution, the place where everyone came not just for bread but for connection and community. Lydia and Yates were recognized as pillars of the town, respected for their generosity and their commitment to making life better for everyone. Reverend Thomas retired in 1889, and the church held a farewell party in his honor at the bakery. He stood in the center of the space that had once been Henderson's general store, looking around with tears in his eyes. "When I first met Lydia," he said to the assembled crowd, "she was a young woman alone in the world, determined to continue her father's work of helping others. I worried about her, thought she might not survive in a harsh place like Westcliff, but I underestimated her strength and her heart. She didn't just survive. She thrived, and she helped the rest of us thrive too. This bakery is proof that one person with determination and compassion can change an entire community." Everyone applauded, and Lydia felt tears streaming down her face. She hadn't started baking bread to change anything. She had just wanted to help hungry children. But somehow, in trying to feed bodies, she had nourished souls, including her own. By 1890, Thomas was 6 years old and starting school. Martha was 4, and James was 2. The bakery was busier than ever, and Lydia and Yates had hired 2 assistants to help manage the workload. They had come so far from that desperate first year when Lydia had given away her father's watch just to buy flour. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed and the bakery was closed, Lydia and Yates sat together on the bench outside their door, watching the stars come out over the mountains. "You ever think about that first day?" Lydia asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "When you found me crying in the alley all the time, it was the luckiest day of my life, mine too." She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I was so lost then. I had nothing but grief and determination. I didn't know if I could keep going. But you did. You kept baking bread even when you had nothing left to give. Because I had to, because those children needed it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I think I needed it too. I needed a purpose, something bigger than my grief. Baking bread gave me that. And now look at what you've built." Yates gestured to the bakery, to the town around them. "You fed hungry people, and in doing so, you fed your own heart. You let love and community in, and it changed everything." "We built it together," Lydia corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. We're a team. Always have been, always will be." He pulled her closer, and she snuggled into his warmth, feeling peaceful in a way she never had before meeting him. More years passed, bringing changes and challenges. The mine had a few scares but no major disasters, partly due to the safety improvements Samuel Price had implemented. The town grew as more people came seeking work and opportunity. The bakery expanded, taking over the building next door and doubling in size. Thomas, Martha, and James all learned the family trade, spending their afternoons after school working in the bakery. They learned not just how to bake bread, but why it mattered, understanding that feeding people was about more than just providing sustenance. In 1895, when Thomas was 11, he asked his mother a question that had been on his mind for a while. "Why do we give bread away for free? Wouldn't we make more money if we sold it all?" Lydia set down the dough she was kneading and looked at her son, this boy who was growing up so fast. "Come here. I want to tell you a story." Thomas came to stand beside her, and Martha and James, always curious, crowded in too. Yates stopped his work to listen, smiling because he knew what story she was going to tell. "When I first came to Westcliff," Lydia began, "I had nothing but flour and determination. I started baking bread because I saw children going hungry and I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I gave away everything I had, even when it meant I went hungry myself. One day I was crying in an alley because I had just traded my father's watch, the last valuable thing I owned, just to buy more flour. That's when your father found me. Papa found you crying, Martha asked, her eyes wide. He did. And instead of walking away, he gave me money to buy more flour. He saw what I was trying to do and he wanted to help. That kindness changed my life. It made me believe in people again, made me believe that goodness still existed in hard places. Because Papa was good, James said solemnly. Because your Papa was good, Lydia agreed. And that goodness grew into this. She gestured around the bakery. We give bread away because someone was kind to me when I had nothing. We give it away because hungry children shouldn't have to stay hungry. We give it away because we have enough, and sharing what we have makes the whole community stronger. Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he nodded. I understand. It's not just about bread. It's about caring for people. Exactly. Money is important, but it's not the most important thing. Taking care of each other is what matters most. All three children went back to work with new understanding, and Yates came over to kiss Lydia's temple. You're a good mother, a good teacher. I learned from the best, she said, thinking of her father and all he had taught her about compassion and service. By 1900, the new century had arrived, bringing with it changes and modernization. Westcliff was no longer just a rough mining town, but a proper community with schools and churches and businesses. The Lawsons' bakery was one of the oldest establishments still operating, a testament to hard work and community support. Thomas was 16 now, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's compassionate heart. Martha was 14, already showing signs of the beautiful woman she would become. James was 12, mischievous and energetic, always finding new ways to make people laugh. Lydia stood in the bakery one evening after closing, looking around at everything they had built. She was 39 years old now, with gray threading through her brown hair and lines on her face from years of smiling and hard work. But she felt younger somehow, lighter than she had at 22 when she had arrived in Westcliff lost and grieving. What are you thinking about? Yates asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. How far we've come. How different life is now. Better, I hope. So much better. I never imagined I could be this happy. She turned in his arms, looking at the man who had been her partner for nearly 2 decades. He had aged too, his dark hair now peppered with silver, his face weathered by sun and time. But to her, he was as handsome as the day she had met him in that alley. I love you, she said. I don't say it enough, but I love you so much, Yates Lawson. I love you too, Lydia Lawson. You're still the best thing that ever happened to me. They kissed in their bakery, surrounded by the smell of flour and yeast and home. Outside, Westcliff was settling in for the night, families in their houses, children in their beds, bellies full partly because of the bread this couple had been baking and sharing for nearly 20 years. As they walked upstairs to their apartment above the bakery, Lydia thought about that girl she had been, crying in an alley because she had nothing left to give. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped to help, who had seen worth in her when she could barely see it in herself. She thought about all the loaves of bread they had baked together, all the people they had fed, all the ways their small acts of kindness had rippled out to create something beautiful. The bread had fed hungry bodies, yes. But in baking it, in sharing it, in building a life and a business around it, Lydia had fed her own hungry heart. And Yates, the cowboy who had eaten every loaf she baked in those early days when he would stop by her cabin, had fed her heart in return with his love and partnership and unwavering belief in her. They had started with almost nothing and built a life rich with meaning and connection. They had faced hardship and overcome it together. They had created a family and a business that would continue long after they were gone. In 1905, Thomas married a sweet girl named Sarah who worked as a teacher in Westcliff. The wedding was held in the church where Yates and Lydia had been married, with the reception in the bakery that had been the center of their lives for so long. Watching her son stand with his bride, Lydia felt the weight of time passing, the strange mix of sadness and joy that comes with watching children grow up and start their own lives. "He's going to be happy," Yates whispered, taking her hand. "I know. She's perfect for him. Just like you were perfect for me." Martha married 2 years later, and James the year after that. All 3 of their children stayed in Westcliff, working in the bakery and raising their own families in the town where they had grown up. The Lawson family expanded, adding grandchildren and new traditions, but always centered around the bakery and the work of feeding people, body and soul. In 1910, Lydia and Yates celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary with a party at the bakery. The whole town came, people of all ages who had been touched by their generosity over the years. Stories were told, toasts were made, and Lydia stood beside her husband feeling overwhelmed by gratitude. Samuel Price, now retired and white-haired, stood to speak. "I remember when Miss Lancaster first came to town. She was just a young woman with more determination than sense, baking bread for people who couldn't pay her." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "I tried to stop her, threatened her even. I'm not proud of it, but she didn't back down. She kept baking, kept giving, kept showing us what it meant to be a community. And this young cowboy showed up and saw what I couldn't see, that Lydia Lancaster was someone special. Together, they've made Westcliff a better place. They've fed us, employed us, taught us, and loved us. We're all richer for having them in our lives." The applause was thunderous, and Lydia wiped tears from her cheeks. She looked around at all these faces, some she had known for decades, some newer additions to the community. But all of them were connected through the simple act of breaking bread together. "Thank you," she said when the noise died down. "Thank you all for being part of our story, for supporting us when we had nothing, for believing in what we were trying to build. This bakery exists because of all of you. Our family exists because of all of you. You gave us purpose and community and love. We're the ones who should be thanking you." More applause, more tears, and then the party continued with music and dancing and enough bread and cake to feed an army. Lydia danced with Yates, with her sons and grandsons, with old friends and new. She felt young again, full of the same fierce hope that had sustained her through those early difficult days. As the years continued to pass, Lydia and Yates gradually stepped back from daily operations of the bakery, letting Thomas take over as the main manager while they enjoyed a semi-retirement. They still came in most days, unable to fully leave the work that had defined so much of their lives. But now, they could take time for other things too. They traveled some, taking the train to Denver and even once to San Francisco, seeing parts of the country they had never had time to explore before. But they always came back to Westcliff, to the mountains and the town and the bakery that held so many memories. In 1918, Lydia was 58 years old and Yates was 62. They had been married for 36 years, and their love had only deepened with time. They sat together on the porch of the house they had built behind the bakery, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. "Do you remember that first loaf of bread?" Yates asked, a familiar question that had become almost a ritual between them over the years. "Which first loaf?" "The first one I ever baked, the first one you ate, the first one I ate." You gave it to me that first evening I came to your cabin, and it was the best thing I had ever tasted. It was slightly burned on one side. It was perfect, just like you." He took her hand, his fingers gnarled now with age but still strong. "I ate every loaf you baked in those early days. Couldn't help myself. I told myself I was just being supportive, but really I was falling in love with you. I fell in love with you too, right from the start, even though I tried to deny it. Good thing we stopped denying it, the best thing." She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in the familiar warmth of him. "We built a good life, didn't we? The best life. We fed people, raised good children, made a difference. All because you stopped in an alley and gave me $1. All because you had the courage to bake bread for hungry people when you were hungry yourself." They sat in peaceful silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting and every day since. The bakery lights came on as evening fell, and they could see Thomas and Sarah through the windows, working the ovens and serving customers. "It will continue after we're gone," Lydia said. "The bakery, the work, the tradition of feeding people. Our children will carry it on and their children after them. That's a good legacy, better than most people leave behind." "It's enough," Lydia agreed. "More than enough, it's everything." The years that followed were gentle ones. Lydia and Yates watched their family grow and flourish. They celebrated births and weddings, mourned losses, and continued to be present in the life of the community they had helped shape. The bakery thrived under Thomas's management, and he had expanded their charitable work even further, starting a soup kitchen that operated out of the bakery basement during the hard winters. When Lydia turned 70, the town threw her a birthday party that lasted all weekend. People came from all over Colorado, former residents of Westcliff who had moved away but never forgotten the bread woman and her cowboy husband. Stories were shared, memories were made, and Lydia felt the full weight of a life well lived. "I never wanted to be famous," she told Yates that night as they lay in bed. "I just wanted to help. And you did. You helped so many people, Lydia. You changed lives. We changed lives together." "Together," he agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." They lived to see the Great Depression, watching their community struggle through hard times once again. But the lessons they had taught about helping each other, about sharing what you have and taking care of the vulnerable, meant Westcliff weathered the storm better than many towns. The bakery continued its tradition of feeding those who couldn't pay, and the community pulled together as it always had. In 1935, Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79. Lydia was 75, and losing him felt like losing half of herself. They had been together for 52 years, partners in every sense of the word. The funeral was the largest Westcliff had ever seen, people filling the church and spilling out into the street, all there to honor the cowboy who had come to town looking for work and instead found love and purpose. Lydia stood at his graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and spoke the words she had been holding in her heart. "You fed my heart, Yates Lawson. Every single day for 52 years, you fed my heart with your love and your partnership and your belief in me. I will carry that with me until we meet again." She lived 3 more years without him, years that felt both long and short. She spent her days in the bakery, teaching her great-grandchildren the recipes she had perfected over a lifetime. She told stories about the early days, about baking bread in a tiny cabin with nothing but determination and hope. She made sure they understood that the bakery wasn't just a business but a mission, a way of caring for the community that had cared for them. In the spring of 1938, Lydia Lancaster Lawson passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by family and love. She died in the apartment above the bakery, in the bed she had shared with Yates for so many years, with the smell of fresh bread rising from below. Her funeral was even larger than Yates had been. The entire town shut down for the day, businesses closing and schools dismissing early so everyone could attend. The church overflowed with people whose lives she had touched, whose hunger she had fed, whose hearts she had nourished with her fierce compassion and unwavering commitment to doing good. Thomas stood to speak, his voice strong despite his tears. "My mother taught me that bread is more than food. It's a connection between people. It's a way of saying I see you and you matter and you're not alone." She baked bread for hungry people, and in doing so she taught us all how to be more human, how to care for each other, how to build community out of flour and water and love. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "My father used to say that he fed my mother's heart. But the truth is, they fed each other. They built a life together based on love and service. They created something that will outlast them, something that will continue feeding people, body and soul, for generations to come. That's the legacy they left us. Not just a bakery, but a way of being in the world." Lydia was buried beside Yates in the Westcliff Cemetery, overlooking the town they had called home for over 50 years. Their graves became a local landmark, a place people visited to remember and reflect on what community means. The bakery continued for many more decades, run by Thomas and then by his children and then by theirs. It remained a gathering place, somewhere people could come not just for bread but for connection and belonging. The tradition of feeding those who couldn't pay continued, an unbroken thread stretching back to that first loaf Lydia had given away in 1882. In the bakery, hung above the main counter where everyone could see it, was a simple plaque. It read, "In memory of Lydia and Yates Lawson, who taught us that feeding people is an act of love, and love is what makes us human." And every day, as fresh bread came out of the ovens, filling the air with its warm, yeasty smell, the people of Westcliff remembered. They remembered the woman who had baked bread for the hungry, and the cowboy who had eaten every loaf and, in doing so, had fed her heart. They remembered that love isn't always grand gestures and dramatic declarations. Sometimes it's as simple as sharing bread, as profound as seeing someone when they feel invisible, as transformative as building a life together one loaf at a time. The story of Lydia and Yates became legend in Westcliff, passed down through generations. Children grew up hearing about the bread woman and her cowboy, about how one person's determination to help others could change an entire community. The bakery stood as proof that their love and their work had meant something, that they had made a difference that would echo long after they were gone. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever comes after, Lydia and Yates were together again, baking bread and feeding hearts, their love as warm and nourishing as fresh bread from the oven, eternal and unchanging, a testament to what two people can build when they choose love and service over selfishness and greed. They had started with almost nothing and created everything that mattered. They had fed hungry people and, in doing so, had fed their own hungry hearts, finding in each other and in their community the belonging and purpose every soul seeks. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a life well lived together, ending where it had begun, in love, in service, and in the simple, profound act of breaking bread with those in need.